George Fox that I roped into being here tonight. It didn't take too much strong arming, so I'm really happy. This is their finals week, so we should be extra appreciative that they are here. I'm going to kind of ask panel questions, but we're going to go through and have them talk and share some of their research. I told them to kind of go where it will, and this can be an organic talk a little bit too. And then at the end, we'll open up for questions from anyone in the audience. You can ask them about the kind of student, like favorite flower, anything. It's not a job interview, so we're not limited, but we'd love to hear about their research and their interests in history, and I'm really excited to introduce these guys. They're fantastic. So I'm going to go through and have them share their name and where they're from and what their major in here is George Fox is.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm Jessica. I'm from Hawaii, from the island of Oahu. I'll be going there this summer. I'm a senior, but I'll be graduating in the fall. And I'm a history major.
Hi, my name's Emma. I am a senior graduating on Saturday, this Saturday. Thank you. I'm from Spokane, Washington, and I'm also a history major. Was there another question in the program?
No, just that. Okay.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a junior, so I still got another year to wait for graduate walk-ons a Saturday, hopefully. I'm actually from here, I'm from Oregon, a little town of Aurora. It's about half hour east of here. You guys probably know it well. Oh, you do? And I'm a history and politics major.
All right, so our first big question is...
Rachel, excuse me.
Yes.
Can we emphasize that you have to speak into the mic and loudly? Because
Yes.
Otherwise we won't hear anything you say.
Yeah, we won't hear you. So act like you're eating an ice cream cone. So here's your quick lesson on mic etiquette. You're eating an ice cream cone, you need it almost as close as if you were going to lick it. But please don't, because you're sharing it with really people. Okay.
Speak up.
So first question is, why are you studying history? You can make someone else go first if you want to.
Closer.
Yeah, so I'm studying history because I've always found interest in it. I love stories, and I love seeing how people connect over time, how people are just people, like even like 20, 40, 100, 1,000 years ago, we're just all people, and it's fascinating to see those stories.
I study history because it's always been a part of my life. My dad is a big history buff. He's always reading something new or talking about something new, or talking with people about things that he knows, and taking us to monuments and museums and things like that. And so he kind of just instilled that love of the past into me. And but I didn't realize that that's what I wanted to study, or it was even a viable option for me to study until before I came to Fox. I visited the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C., and that was a really powerful experience, a really awesome experience. And there were, in the American History Museum, there was the military history wing, and they had sections of the Berlin Wall, and that was incredibly powerful to stand right next to it. And it became real to me in a way that, and like a viable field of study in a way that it never had before, because there were people who there was graffiti on the Berlin Wall, and people had written that graffiti, and I couldn't read it because it was in German, but it was people who had done that, and I was standing at the same place where they did, and it kind of became real to me, like Jessica said, that those are people that my dad was always talking about, and I thought that was really interesting and fascinating.
See, nice of it being at the end of the line, like I can say, oh yeah, what they said, and then pass it back off. I won't do that. But a very similar experience. I mean, been interested in history for about as long as I can remember. My grandpa fought in the Second World War, and that's kind of what got me started, was my dad showing me his medals and the flight logs and all that memorabilia, and that kind of got me interested in thinking, wait a second, there was a time before I was born. There was a history of the world, history of people. Many different histories, many different stories. And I've just had a love of history since then, pursuing these different stories that we tell each other and finding that they do have meaning. Standing in front of the Berlin Wall or whatever we choose to study our own particular interests, and finding meaning in the stories we tell each other. So.
Okay, so I know you all have done amazing research because I've read papers by all of you, in some class or another, I think. I can't reveal that because of FERPA, right? So I know you all have done amazing research though, and I'm really excited to have you share some of the research you've done. So, what area of history you studied? What is your research? And tell us a little bit about what you studied, what you learned. Give us your 5-minute talk on your research topic, or less. Or more.
So I don't know if I have a particular area of history that I study.
You just talk about some of your projects.
I have focused around a particular, I guess that counts. So the last 2 papers I've written for history classes have all revolved around popular media in World War II. So the first one I did was on radio and how the propaganda influenced the radio on the home front. And the second paper I did was on Hollywood and how war movies made during the war were affected by the Office of War Information's policies. And it was really interesting to see the dichotomy between both of them. It was super interesting for me to learn that the study of radio is during World War II is fairly new. A lot of the research started coming out in the early 2000s, and there wasn't much before that because most people were focusing on Hollywood. So there was a ton more research on Hollywood than there was on radio, which kind of blew me away. I was like, oh, what about radio though? Because it's coming out that it affected so much. And I love seeing the different positions between radio and Hollywood. Radio offered a more personal view because the radio was inside the people's homes, whereas Hollywood you had to actually go to the theaters. But Hollywood was a lot more cheesy in the way they portrayed propaganda, especially in one of the movies I focused on was Once Upon a Honeymoon with Cary Grant and Ginger Rogers, and the propaganda in that movie was pretty hitting you on the head, which was interesting. But yeah, so I loved seeing how the government influenced the way that media was shared with the public and how the public took that information in.
Like Jessica, I've kind of gone all over the board with my studies, especially because there's not really a specialization program. So I've taken the opportunity then in my historical research methods classes and my big papers that are much more open in their prompts to kind of try and just touch a lot to see what I like to study, see what areas I like to study. And I've kind of landed for most of my undergrad career on military history. I think that wartime presents an opportunity for any course of study that you want. You can study weapons, you can study tactics and strategy, you can study politics, you can study economics, all the way that wartime influences all of those things. So, and it's all, in wartime, it's all very contained and it's all very dynamic because it's start and end date of the war, which I also like because I like to have the start and end dates and not just the big phase of an era. I like to have the set period of time in history. But over the course of my undergrad studies, I've touched on the Mongols in Russia and Ukraine now, but in Kiev, and how that affected Russian culture and politics. For my senior paper, I wrote on the U.S. Navy in the War of 1812 and its developmental role it was early U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy didn't have very many ships yet. It was still kind of a developing entity in the United States military. And I kind of looked at how the War of 1812 could kind of be a shifting point. You can kind of see it as a shifting point as the Navy is being used in new ways and expanded, and the U.S. officers are using their resources in new ways. And ideally, I would have liked to have made that 15-page paper into like a 100-page book, because there's a lot more that I wanted to go into that I didn't have the space for. But military history, in another class I did industrialization in the war and the Civil War, and how that contributed to kind of the rise of the modern era of warfare. I looked at submarines, I looked at ironclads, I looked at some other things which escape me now because the submarines were really the coolest part. But military history, weapons history, I think is really interesting. That's very niche, but that's something that I think is very interesting. So that's what I've kind of been landing in a lot, is that military, wartime history, and how that affects cultures and how that affects societies.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident that we all kind of have a military history bent. If any of you have met the professor George Fox, Dr. Carrie Irish teaches most of our upper division courses, and so he's a big military history buff, and so that's how it transfers to the students. I guess I'm weird then, because I've had a pretty focused history track for the past 2-3 years. Starting the summer after my freshman year, I started a project with Dr. Paul Otto on South African history in the 1930s. And so I've been working with him on that for the past 2 years. Working that first summer, and then working this past summer on a Richter scholarship grant to continue working on the project. 5 minutes, wow, okay. The project focuses on an organization in South Africa known as the All-African Convention. So, in the 1930s, I mean, if you follow South African politics or anything going on in the world today, you'll have heard of the African National Congress as the dominant political party of South Africa. And so this appeals to my interests both as a historian but also as a political scientist. And so I'm studying how in the 1930s there was a separate organization called the All-African Convention that kind of gets forgotten in quite a bit of the scholarship related to South African history, so it's been enjoyable to dig into the primary sources and kind of explore where few have been. It's kind of exciting in a way. And so he and I have been working on a book on the subject, South Africa 1935 to 1936, the first meeting of the All-African Convention. And it's kind of a very hard subject to address because it's directly related to apartheid and the establishment of apartheid in South Africa, which anything even tangentially related to it is it's a very difficult topic. And so it's been full of exploration and pitfalls related to studying the history of this era. And yeah, the project's still ongoing. I'm helping Dr. Otto teach a class on South African history this coming fall. I don't know if you'll maybe be in the class or not, but it'll be a fun class.
It's a good class.
And so yeah, the research is still ongoing.
You helped write a game too, right?
Well, that's kind of it's an overlap project. It's do you want to talk about?
Yeah, tell them about it.
Okay, so there's 2 projects going side by side here. One is the actual the scholarship part, which scholarship's fun, but not quite as fun as the other project, which is reacting to the past. So reacting to the past is it's a pedagogy which invites students to take on characters at critical historical moments. So for instance, the writing of the Constitution is a reaction to the past class. What's another good one? The New York in the Revolutionary War is another key moment. And so the students will actually take on characters like James Madison, Thomas Jefferson. And there's an element in the class where they actually have to talk like them, you actually have to get up and speak and give presentations. But you're also doing an incredible amount of reading and writing related to the time period, whichever time period it is. And so it's a fun experience. It actually gets the students to engage with the history in new and exciting ways, especially when it relates to gen ed students, those students who are there to take history not because they love it like we do, but because they need to fail a course. And so reacting games are a way to engage students from all sorts of backgrounds. And so that's been an ongoing process as well.
Yes, the reacting to the past pedagogy is really interesting. One of our history professors uses it almost exclusively in all of his classes. So the students are taking on historical characters, reading things they've written, things from their era, things they would know, and then they have to act out historical events and try and go through these ideas and thoughts. I got to do a summer portion, and some of my students got to hear the fact that since I was playing a dock worker from the 17th century, I looked up some interesting language from the 17th century, and it was or 18th century. It was really fun. I had some great 18th century lingo that I used as a dock worker from the 18th century. The first thing I said, I heard a student go, it was pretty funny. Appropriate by modern day standards, kind of. It was really fun.
Very loosely.
But it was a great way of really getting into the role, and I'm actually, you guys don't know this, but I'm going to incorporate a short game into History 290 in the future to help primary source analysis. Because the point of these games is it makes students think deeply about the sources they're reading. And actually we found they prepare more, especially because they have to get up and talk in front of all of their classmates, like every class period. So they prepare quite a bit for these classes, and it's been a really effective pedagogy. So things are changing from the eras where your history professors lectured and you took notes. There's still that going on. We've still got Carrie Irish and Mark Weiner. They are still doing that. But things are changing too, because we know there are other ways to teach, and it's really interesting. Paul's trying to convince me to do more and more of it, and I'm like, I'm teaching how to do research. We can't just play games all the time, unfortunately. But I do some stuff, I think.
Other Paul.
Huh?
Other Paul.
Yeah, there's other, yes. Other Paul Otto.
Yes.
Yeah, not this Paul. So like, you would convince me to do it too, right? Maybe.
I'm not as convinced as he is, but
Okay,
yes.
I understand. Okay, so our next question is, why do you think history is still relevant today? Dun, dun. This is a grad school application essay question,
Oh, it
guys.
so is.
So have fun.
I thought about this really long and hard.
Good.
Don't know if I have a good answer to.
That's okay.
But this is actually a question I've been thinking about actually a lot over the course of my college career, because why be a historian if there's no point to studying history is an awkward question. And I get that a lot. Like, oh, it's just memorizing facts. I'm like, no, it's so much more than that, though. And something that I have come to take comfort in, or what I try to explain to people nowadays of why history is important, is that history tells you the context of how we got to be to where we are today, which can help you understand different peoples, like other than you, different frames of thinking other than your own. It helps you empathize with people a lot more. Yeah, and along with that, if you look to the past, I think there's always stuff about you can learn from your mistakes, and that's something really important. It's not necessarily, I think Caitlin Corning likes to say, it's not like, you can't predict the future. Historians can't predict the future, but it can give you some pretty clear, like, if you do this, then this will probably happen. So, you know, if you're a monarchy, maybe don't raise taxes super high, because then you'll have a peasant revolt. Like, little things like that. I mean, that's not the most applicable things in American society today. Oh, well, maybe it is. I don't know. But, yeah, so, I mean, context. I feel like that's always what history is about, and I feel like that would be a very history student answer. It's just like context, but context.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this is a question that I'm answering preemptively, Rachel, but I'm planning on going to grad school in the next year or 2 or 3, and I've decided that I want to study folklore and the history of folklore and how that affects societies. Yeah, I haven't told you this. This is news to you. I'm studying folklore. Surprise.
That's Sarah had it.
Huh?
So that's a Sarah Monroe study. grad
Oh,
school.
yeah? Good, that's good. That's good for me to hear, actually. But the reason I chose folklore is because studying cultures, folklore, and the myths and legends that they really adhere to and revere and tell generation after generation after generation, I think reveals a lot about what that culture values and the cultural, the core of a society. And if you can understand that, then you can understand a lot about why, and there's a lot of psychology in here too. I think you can understand a lot about why they act the way they do and why they have acted the way they have in the past, and why they're acting the way they are now. Because like Jessica said, context is everything, and you want to understand how the world got to be to where it is today so that you can move forward. You don't try to put the past in a box that fits the present view, but you're trying to use the past to understand how we are, why we are the way we are today. And so studying the past and studying history and studying how we got to where we are today can help us understand where, for instance, for diplomatic purposes, for diplomacy purposes, why all these different cultures and countries are interacting the way they do, and how you can best move forward from there. And I think understanding the history of these cultures, of these peoples, is the most important thing. It's, Jessica said context, and that's the best, most concise way to say it, is context. So.
Yeah, wow. Follow up on that.
We've got some deep seniors to follow.
Yeah, I also have more time to think about this question.
Yeah.
I want to say it's not two things, it's just one thing. A way of looking at history, not just professionally, but as a Christian. I'm a Christian, go to a Christian university, and I want to find ways to go beyond just incorporating the professional aspects of history or its relevancy into my faith, but rather the other way around. Faith seeking understanding. And many different people can find different ways of doing this. A biologist might seek understanding of the world around us through nature. A physicist did movement of the stars, etc. And I think historians can have faith-seeking understanding in understanding the past and our collective memory. And this isn't as straightforward as it might seem at first. I know I've had people who come to me as well and say, "Oh, it's just memorizing facts," and it's more than that. It's more nuanced, you could say. And so, to that end, I think history is relevant because it gives us a new perspective on charity. I think too often it's easy for us to think that ours is the best way, that ours is the only way, that ours is the first way that people have thought about these things or done these things. And more often than not, a careful study of history reveals that we aren't the first to think of these things. We aren't the first to try this or to try that. And so a careful study of history, I think, brings in and allows for this Christian charity that mine is maybe not the best way, not only in relation to those around me, but to those who come before me. I think I kind of flippantly passed off that my interest in history came out of a realization that I'm not the first, but I think that is the case, and that will always be the case. And as long as that remains the case, as long as human nature remains that way, I think there will always be a relevance for history and for the study of history. So.
What do you think, guys? We let him into grad school? Yes,
Yeah.
I let him in. Yes, that was a lot better than one of my grad school admissions essays that I wrote in like an hour before it was due because I kind of forgot about it when I was wedding planning. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. Okay, so what I want to hear now, first I want to just hear why George Fox. Just because if who in this room went to George Fox? We've got a few of them. Yeah. And then we've got a few who have worked there, who live very, very close to George Fox, a few have been involved over the years too. So this is an invested group here. So they always want to hear why people went to George Fox University. And it's totally fine to be like, they gave me the best financial aid package, because that's my answer for where I went. So.
Yeah, so I wanted a small school, and I wanted a Christian school, because I am also a Christian. And I wanted that tight, close community, and George Fox seemed to fit that. I also didn't come in as a history major, I came in as an English major, and I took in a scholarship test for that, and I got pretty good, so I was like, that's nice.
So also financially it worked out for me.
But it was really the people, I think, that drew me to George Fox. I just saw immediately, this is a really good community, and I can fit in here.
Okay.
I'm really embarrassed about my answer.
No worries. Is there a cute guy on campus?
No.
No, just kidding.
I'm really lazy by nature, and I have known one of the math professors at George Fox since long before he started teaching at George Fox, when he lived in Spokane and then he moved down to Newark to teach here. And a girl I knew growing up went to George Fox, and one of my best friend from high school went to George Fox, and I, right out of high school, was too lazy to fill out any college applications because I didn't want to. And so I didn't, and so I went to the community college, the local community college, for 2 years and got a transfer degree. And then time came for me to apply to a 4-year school to finish my bachelor's, and I still didn't want to do any applications. And everyone I knew, many people that I knew, had gone to George Fox, and I didn't want to go to a state school. And it was small and it was Christian, and I was like, those are 2 really good things that I would probably look for. And I already knew people there, and so it's the only place I applied. Because it was easy. And I'm really happy. It was the best decision I ever made, and it was definitely the right choice. But it wasn't some serendipitous, yes, go here. It was I don't know, this is here. So I went. And it ended up being great. It ended up being the best decision I could have made. And then my mom came down and saw the campus with me for orientation, and she went to SPU for her undergrad, and she was like, yeah, it feels totally the same as SPU did when I went there. It feels the same here at George Fox. And she was really excited for me, and that got me excited, and I was like, yeah, I want this is what I want. So, it's not very interesting, but it's the truth.
Yeah, was it why George Fox?
Why George Fox?
Why George Fox? Why George Fox? It's been a while now. Anyways, but I've applied to a few different schools, Whitworth, Wheaton, a lot of other small Christian colleges that kind of fit the profile. And I think I actually settled on Fox. I've heard of this, they just started a recent program, the William Callender's program, great books program, reading from Gilgamesh to modernist, postmodern philosophy, lots and lots and lots of reading. But I like reading, that's a good thing. And that kind of settled the bill for me, actually. That kind of brought me to Fox, as well as the outstanding history program and the politics department as well. So I think that trifecta kind of made Fox an inevitability. So.
It's okay. I actually chose not to go to a school because of a boy, so it's really okay.
Oh.
It wasn't even a boy I knew. I just had heard at Whitworth that what happens is the Ring by Spring there, and I heard that a guy catches your train in the cafeteria, and then you end up dating, and then you get proposed to. And while I was there touring, a guy caught my train in the cafeteria, and I was like, nope, too fast, I'm not going there. So, one of the reasons I didn't go to And then I got married in the middle of college, so it still didn't work out in my favor. No. Okay, so next thing is career goals and dreams or next steps in your life. And you don't have to know, it's okay.
What are you talking about? I have my whole future planned.
Yes, Jessica knows everything.
I really don't.
Everything's
oceans.
Oh, and if you don't mind sharing like extracurricular training and internships and stuff you've done too, I think that can be interesting.
Well, I want to become an archivist, so Rachel helped me discover that. So I interned for her in the past, and that was really fun, and I realized, oh, this is what I want to do. I thought I wanted to do museum work for a really long time, because I thought museum work meant preserving historical documents, but it turns out that's archives. So it's like that's what I want to do. And just working in the archives solidified that even more. I worked at the George Fox Museum, and I love that too, but I love archives even more, so that's where I'm going. And I'm going to be interning for Rachel again next fall, this fall,
Yeah.
the coming fall. And yeah, I'll be going to grad school to get my master's in library science. Don't know where yet, haven't applied. And as far as the future, I have an inkling of a dream. So like I said, I'm from Hawaii, and the archive system in Hawaii is pretty bad. To give an example, there's a few good archives in Hawaii. We have one museum. It's good. But my stepfather actually works for an Episcopal diocese there, and they have an archives, but there is no archivist. It's only on a volunteer basis, and it is in a leaky dungeon basement, so the documents get wet and destroyed, and that is really upsetting to me. And so I would love to work on the mainland and get a lot of good experience, and then maybe go back to Hawaii and see if I can help out with the situation there.
Like I said before, I want to go to grad school. I want to get a MA in folklore, or folklore studies, or history of folklore, or something like that. I haven't really landed on exactly what I want to do in the future. I'm not planning on going to grad school for another year or 2 or 3. I want to be able to work for a little bit and just give myself some time to breathe and gain some more experience and gain some more work references and things like that before I go into grad school. But I do want to go to grad school, and after that, I haven't really landed on anything. I love academia, I really do. I love what I do. I don't know if I want to be a professor at the collegiate level. I don't love lesson planning, I don't think, or grading. I really don't love grading. So I haven't closed that door off entirely, but at this point I don't think that's what I'm trying to pursue. And so what I think I'd like to do is, I like to teach people, I just don't like to grade stuff. So I'm thinking, I do really like museum work. I intern currently at the Hooverman Thornhouse Museum under Britta, and I've worked in the George Fox Museum with Jessica, and I really enjoy those things, but what I enjoy the most about those jobs is planning exhibits and figuring out ways to get the information across to people. So I'm thinking something like maybe an educational director for a museum or something along those lines. If not that, then some kind of cultural resource management. I have some background in litigation support, so something along those lines that's research oriented, because I do really love research. And I don't think I ever want to stop doing academic research. I don't think you necessarily have to be employed in a university to do academic research, although it helps because you have funding. It's not a deal breaker. So I definitely want to keep doing that because I love doing that. But as far as what's going to pay the bills, I don't really know. I'm about to graduate, and I think that's the story of every senior right before they graduate is,
I don't know.
I have no idea, but it's going to be fine.
Yeah, life plans, here we go. Okay, so, grad school's a definite yes. Whether or not I take a gap year or not, I don't know yet. My goal right now, sort of split between 2 different paths I see. One that I'm pretty set on is I want to go to grad school for international relations, actually. I'm looking at programs like Johns Hopkins. They have an excellent school for international studies. with an eye for working for the State Department, actually, working for the Foreign Service. And then, after that, I found that will last. But I love not only history, but I do also love politics. I love the interplay of international relations and the dramatic, the epic saga of history about how we've gotten to this point, and being a part of that process, not only as a professional working for the State Department, but also as a peacemaker, and trying to bring those two things together. After that, I do eventually want to teach at the collegiate level. Eventually, I mean, I don't know what that'll look like yet, but likely history, maybe international relations, who knows. But I hate grading, yes, but I love to teach, and so I think that's a fair trade-off, if that's what it requires. Yeah, and I don't know how that'll happen, but I want to end up on a farm someday, at the very end. Just me and that's how I grew up, with sheep and cattle, and I'm looking to end that way too, so. That's my life.
Have you met David Rawson yet?
Yes, we said that by coffee.
Okay, good. Yeah, David Rawson is amazing. He's really fun to spend time with. And he always remembers details about every person. I'm always like, he asks about my kids every time. I'm like, dude, you're an ambassador. Okay. My kids are having fun on the play structure I bought them for Christmas. Thanks for remembering. It's pretty incredible. Yeah, he's a sweet, sweet man. So now it is time for you to ask questions. What questions do you have for these fantastic students?
From Hawaii.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Do you know about Hawaii Prep Academy on the Big Island?
No.
You know that? One of my best friends has taught there for over 30 years.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. No, the last time I visited the Big Island. Oh, I can't remember. The last time I visited the Big Island was when I was like 10. So, I wish. I want to get back there.
I have family on the Big Island and friends who went to Hawaii Prep for it. So, yeah.
Emma, I was interested in your being interested in history of the war. One thing that I've always felt, I'm kind of a history buff, is that war changes history very quickly. You look at Europe after World War II, tremendous changes from just a decade before. And war is an awful thing, but when it happens, it can really change history quickly. And it changes the future because of all the changes that are resulting from the settlement, peacekeeping wars. Is that true?
For sure. That's, that's I think a really nice and concise way of phrasing why I'm really drawn to work in history, because things happen so quickly. One of Dr. Gary Irish's favorite things to say is, he says that people say that war doesn't solve problems, but war solves tons of problems. And it might not be in a good way, and it might not be a nice way, but the war solves the problem, and maybe you don't like the way it's solved and you go back to war, but that's what he says a lot. And I think it's true. It's not nice. It's really terrible. But things change so quickly in wartime, and you can see that in any war, because history takes so long to happen. Eras of history take so long to happen, and so frequently the ends of wars are what mark the end of an era or the beginning of a new era. And it's just a culmination. It's just so interesting to me how the culmination of all of these conflicting interests and all of these problems culminate into violence at such a terrible level. And yeah, things do change very rapidly and very quickly in ways that people don't expect. And then we spend the next century trying to figure out how we deal with the changes that we discovered in that wartime. And I think the 20th century is an excellent example of that. So yeah, war changes everything very quickly, and that's why I like it.
It's the same person who was just talking. I forgot your name, sorry. But you're interested in studies of folklore. So my question is this an ethnic thing, a regional thing, an occupational area? I mean, are you zeroing in on something or anything that sounds like folklore?
That's a good question. I don't know. When I was in high school, I'm gonna tell a little story real quick. When I was in high school, like the summer before my sophomore year of high school, for my English class, we had to read a book that was called The Power of Myth, and I don't remember who it was by, but I thought it was the most boring book ever. I hated it. And I wish I knew, I'm gonna find that book again and read it again because I think now I would love it. Because it talked about how myths are not necessarily like made up stories, because like for America, the founding fathers are these like myths and legendary figures, and they were real people, but they've been elevated to such a standing that they're mythical almost. And England has their own myths in like King Arthur and Robin Hood and things like that, and Rome has its myths in the Roman pantheon of gods, and you know India has their pantheon of traditional Hindu gods, and every culture has these myths and legends of their origin stories, of their deities, of things that bind them together as a culture. And I haven't narrowed down on one particular culture or one particular era because I think it's all really fascinating. I also really love maritime history. That's why I focused on the Navy in the War of 1812. And there's so much myth that surrounds the sea. And that's always fascinating. There's mythical creatures, there's fables and fairy tales and horror stories and ghost ships. And because I don't want to like limit myself too much, because I'm kind of a person who wants to have it all, even though I can't, I like the idea of studying maritime folklore because that way I can look at maritime folklore maybe across different cultures and how it changes culture to culture and how it affects that culture. So if I had to say something, I'd say maybe maritime folklore, ocean folklore. I don't know. There's a field for that.
Make a field.
I might be the only one. That might be the start, but I think that's really interesting and something that I'd want to look into, if that answers your question.
Yeah. When you make your own field, it becomes a lot easier to be the expert in the field. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like a lot of fun. In the class that I teach at Fox in history is how to do historical research. And at the beginning of the course, one of the hardest things for a lot of my students is choosing a research topic. It is almost the hardest part of the course for some students because they can't pick one. And I have to remind all my students, and like this is part of a lecture one day, that this is not the last thing you will ever study. You will study it for one project. You might fall in love with it and study it for the rest of your life, and you may never want to look at it ever again and choose something new. So it is so hard for historians because so many of us are interested in everything to pick one thing in their life. And on the last day of class, I always ask my students, so, will you continue studying this topic or are you looking for something else? And some of them are like, oh my goodness, I love this, I'm totally going to continue this. And some of them are like, never again, I'm never ever looking at this topic again, I'm so sick of it. And it's really interesting to see how that goes, but they know that they have the freedom to pick something else up and try something else out. That's one of the neat parts of history, so. All right, any other, we'll probably take one or two more questions. Oh, let's go Bonnie first.
Oh, it's not a question, but thank you for what you've shared, and we want to wish you each very success in the future in those subjects. Because I think that, as you know, history, you get to know people and understand people and think to other people, and I think that you will really be successful in what you're doing.
One of my ex-students.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Vern Martin, and I was a student in the 8th grade and the 7th grade.
And he was a George Fox history major.
Yeah.
We taught math for the
And he
rest of his
taught
life. All right, Barbara.
You all talked a little bit about finances to begin with, but from my perspective, and I gave up a perfectly good paying job teaching in something that had nothing to do with history, and I gave it up to work in the history field. But one has to be able to support oneself. So do you think about how you can take your interest in history and still put food on your table and gasoline in your car and a few other things? And anybody can answer it.
Do you think about monetizing your interest in history?
I'll go. This is most applicable for me, because I know I'm leaving.
Yeah, you're the one who has to.
I'm the one who has to think about this really immediately. I think about that every day. History is a rather competitive field, and I'm a competitive person, so that doesn't really bother me, but I have had conversations with my parents about their concern that I maybe won't be a viable option for me. Not that they don't think I can do it, but because they don't think that the jobs are going to be available. A lot of it has to do with my faith, honestly. I trust that things will be taken care of and food will be put on the table. And I've seen that happen in my own college career, because college is an expense in itself that maybe I haven't been all the time sure that it was going to get paid for, but it has. And because I've seen that in my undergrad college career, I just have to have faith that it's going to continue to happen, and I have to keep looking, and I have to keep putting myself out there and trying, and something's going to stick. And I've done the jobs that are very steady, pretty well paying. I had about a year between community college and George Fox where I was just working full time, and it paid fairly well, but I was really unhappy with what I did. I just felt drained and I didn't like it, and even though I was with my family, like it wasn't like I didn't have close-knit relations around me, I just was not happy with where I was. And so right now, what I think I need to do is try and be happy in what I'm doing, because like I don't want to wake up like dread in the morning, because when I was doing something that I didn't love doing, I dreaded going to bed at night because I knew I had to wake up the next morning and go to work. And I don't want that to be my life for, 10, 15, 20 years until I find a new job. So and maybe that will change. Maybe that will change, and I will decide that I do need to take a really sharp left turn into something that's not entirely history related. I have a lot of other interests. But what I think right now I want to see is I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And history has a lot of applicable skills to the business world as well. So there's detail, you can be detail oriented, you work well in teams, you work well on your own. And we have a wonderful member of the career coaching team who loves to go around, because he was a history major, he loves to go around and say, I was a history major, history majors, there's more history majors in the business world than there are business majors, you're gonna make it. So I feel like there's always gonna be something for me to fall back on, but at this point, I really want to try and get into this field because this is what I really love.
Yes. Transferable skills, right?
You want to answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, work for the government. I mean, that's cash flow, but not really. In all seriousness, that's not why I want to do it. I mean, I have plans at UC. I kind of gave you a few of them, but I have other plans to fall back. So fall back. It's kind of just kind of go through your plans until the plans run out. But yes, definitely. So there's practical considerations. Obviously, you have to consider these things, but also do what you love, and the money will come, that will follow. Maybe not the amounts you want, but maybe you realize you didn't want those big numbers to begin with. What would you do with it? I think one of the greatest
Electric
curses.
bills, guys, electric bills.
Well, I'm thinking some of the big cash money that
Yes.
a lot of students expect maybe after going through college, and I think in some ways one of the greatest curses that I know I could get is to have ultimately not know what to do with it, which is something to seriously
You give
consider.
it to your local historical society.
Exactly.
That's what you do. There's always something to do with your money.
I mean, it's also I want to try and do what I love because there's only so much time you have in your life to do things with it. My sister goes to school in Seattle Pacific, like her bit, and one of her friends one of her friends was driving around the city of Seattle, and one of those big construction cranes fell on her and killed her. She was 19. And that was sobering, just to talk with her sister about that and realize that, yeah, you don't know when. Maybe I'll get 60 years. Maybe I won't. I'll do what I love in the meantime.
Yeah, we have time. Say it in the moment.
Okay, yeah, so I put all of my history, I put all my chips into history. Like, I just took a running leap and I dove right in. I have no backup plan, so if this doesn't work out, whoops. But I think, when Emma was saying about faith, like, that definitely plays into it. I've definitely felt a calling to history ever since I was, I guess since like 8th grade when I first learned what history actually was. And like I said, I came into George Fox as an English major, which also doesn't make that much money. So, but I went into English and then I went into psychology, which I thought would make more money. So I actually did make like a practical decision, like, oh well, I like history, and I kind of feel called to do it. But what does calling mean, right? Like, I can make money being a counselor, and that suited me just fine. But then I realized, like, I wouldn't be happy doing that every single day of the rest of my life, and I just kind of felt a pull to go back into history. So I just said, okay, God, I trusted my faith in God, and I dove headfirst in and barreling down this path into the unknown.
Okay, I think we give it. We have one more question in the back.
Paul, I think you mentioned that your grandfather was a pilot. Do you know what aircraft he flew?
He flew a TBF in the Pacific. He flew off of the Monterey, 44 to 45.
Oh, okay. That would have been interesting. Alone out of the Pacific. Wow.
Well, I mean, he was with a crew.
I know, but.
Big bar. Yes, yeah.
Alone in an airplane.
All right, well, thank you all for coming tonight and sharing your stories. We could ask you questions all night long, but we'll let you go study for your next final or write that paper. Thanks for coming, and we are excited to see where you go in life. So, thanks, guys.